The massive chamber fell silent as Commander Vexstar stepped forward to the witness stand. His purple scales caught the harsh light from above, and the mechanical whir of his cybernetic eye filled the quiet space. 3 years had passed since the end of the Terran conflict, but the scars on his body told the story of battles that would never truly end. The Galactic War Crimes Tribunal waited with patience that came from hearing too many stories of horror. Representatives from 12 different species sat in judgment, their faces showing the weight of decisions that would shape interstellar law for generations. Vexstar had served the Zeltharian military for 40 standard years, but today he stood as something else entirely, a witness to humanity's true nature. "State your name and rank for the record," the chief judge said in the universal tongue that all spacefaring species used for official business. "Commander Vexstar of the 3rd Zeltharian Fleet," he replied, his voice carrying the rasp of old battle wounds. "Former tactical officer aboard the warship Vengeance's Edge." The judge nodded and gestured for him to continue. "Vexstar good eye?" Swept across the chamber, noting the recording devices and the representatives from dozens of worlds. What he said here would be studied for decades, analyzed by military strategists and historians alike. "I was assigned to the Terran conflict in its early stages," Vexstar began, his mechanical eye focusing on a point somewhere beyond the chamber walls. "My superiors told us that humans were a primitive species. They had only been traveling between stars for less than 200 years. Our intelligence reports called them weak, divided, and poorly equipped." He paused, remembering the briefings that had seemed so certain, so complete. Maps of human space showing scattered colonies with minimal defenses. Population centers that relied on outdated technology. Military forces that seemed laughably small compared to the might of the Zeltharian war machine. "We expected the conflict to last no more than 30 standard days," Vexstar continued. "The High Command planned to use this as a training exercise for our newer officers. A simple conquest against an inferior species." The alien veteran's expression darkened as he recalled those first days of what military historians would later call the most brutal conflict in recorded galactic history. His orders had been straightforward: establish orbital control over the human colony world of New Dakota, neutralize military resistance, and prepare the population for processing. New Dakota was supposed to be an easy target, Vexstar said, his cybernetic eye making small adjustments as he spoke. A farming world with maybe 50,000 humans. Our scans showed minimal military presence. A few patrol ships, some ground-based defense platforms. Nothing that should have troubled a full Zeltharian battle group. But the reality had been different from the very first moment their ships entered the system. The human patrol vessels had not fled or attempted to surrender as expected. Instead, they had charged directly at ships 10 times their size, their pilots broadcasting what Vexstar would later learn were ancient war songs from their homeworld. "The first thing that surprised me was their reaction to our arrival," the veteran testified. "Instead of panic or surrender, they seemed almost excited, like they had been waiting for us." The memory of that first battle still troubled his sleep cycles. 3 human patrol ships against the pride of the Zeltharian fleet. And somehow those primitive vessels had managed to damage 2 of his escort cruisers before being destroyed. Their weapons were crude, their ships barely capable of faster-than-light travel, but their tactics had been unlike anything in Zeltharian military doctrine. "They flew their ships like projectile weapons," Vexstar explained. "No regard for self-preservation, no attempt to preserve valuable equipment. One human pilot named Captain Steve Rogers managed to ram his burning ship into our primary communications array. We lost contact with Fleet Command for 6 hours. The landing on New Dakota had been when Vexstar first encountered the man who would change his understanding of warfare forever. Colonel Jake Morrison commanded the human ground forces with equipment that seemed centuries behind Zeltharian technology. His soldiers carried chemical projectile weapons and wore armor that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Morrison was waiting for us at the primary landing zone," Vexstar recalled. 50 human soldiers against 300 of our best troops. By all logic, the battle should have lasted minutes. Instead, it had stretched into hours of brutal combat that left half of Vextar's landing force dead or wounded. The humans had turned the farming equipment into weapons, using fertilizer and fuel to create explosives that could penetrate Zeltharian armor. They fought from positions that seemed impossible to defend, using knowledge of their own world to make every advance costly. I watched Morrison coordinate his forces while under direct fire from our plasma cannons, Vextar testified. He never took cover, never showed fear. He walked among his soldiers like he was inspecting a parade ground instead of fighting for his life. But what had truly disturbed the Zeltharian commander was not the human tactical skill or their improvised weapons. It was the fact that they sang while they fought. Even as his plasma bolts cut through their ranks, even as their positions were overrun and their equipment destroyed, the humans continued their battle songs. The sound haunted my troops, Vextar admitted. Songs about freedom and sacrifice, about protecting their homes and families. They sang loud enough for us to hear even over the weapon fire. The battle had ended with Morrison's tactical withdrawal, but not before something happened that would shake Vextar's understanding of warfare to its core. A human medic named Lisa Grant had crawled through the crossfire to reach wounded soldiers from both sides. She had treated Zeltharian injuries with the same care she showed her own species. "Grant saved the life of my communications officer," Vextar said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Sergeant Kexton had taken a human projectile to his torso. By all rights, he should have died. But this human female risked her own life to drag him to safety and treat his wounds. The alien veteran paused, his mechanical eye whirring as it adjusted focus. The memory of that moment still confused him, still challenged everything he thought he knew about combat and enemies and the nature of war itself. She could have let him die, Vextar continued. It would have been tactically sound. One less enemy soldier to face in future battles. But she treated him like he was one of her own people. That night, as Vextar filed his reports with Fleet Command, he had tried to explain what he had witnessed. The tactical situation was clear enough. The humans were more capable than intelligence had suggested. But how could he describe the medic who treated enemy wounded? How could he explain soldiers who sang while they died? I realized that first day that this would not be the quick conquest our leaders had promised, Vextar concluded. The humans were something different, something we had never encountered before. The chamber remained silent as the alien veteran finished his opening testimony. Tomorrow he would continue his account, describing how the conflict had escalated and evolved. But for now, he had planted the seed of understanding that would grow throughout his testimony. Humanity was not just another species to be conquered, but something far more dangerous and complex than any enemy the galaxy had ever known. The second day of testimony began with Commander Vextar looking even more tired than before. His cybernetic eye had developed a slight flicker overnight, a sign that the memories he was accessing were causing stress to his neural pathways. The tribunal waited patiently as the alien veteran collected his thoughts. The conflict changed after those first weeks, Vextar began, his voice carrying the weight of reluctant admiration. We thought we understood human capabilities after New Dakota, but we were wrong. They began to adapt faster than any species we had ever encountered. The Zeltharian commander described how the humans had somehow managed to study destroyed Zeltharian equipment and reverse engineer their technology within days. What should have taken years of research was accomplished by human engineers working in underground bunkers with tools that seemed primitive by galactic standards. Captain Pete Davis led their engineering efforts, Vextar testified. A human who had been building bridges and roads before the war started. Within 1 month, he had figured out how our shield generators worked and built better versions using scrap metal and human ingenuity. The siege of Fort Henderson had become a turning point in Vextar's understanding of human warfare. The fort was nothing more than a mountain that the humans had somehow transformed into an impregnable fortress. Davis and his engineering corps had worked around the clock, using Zeltharian technology they barely understood to create defenses that shouldn't have been possible. They turned the entire mountain into a weapon, Vextar explained to the silent chamber. Tunnels that could move troops instantly from one side to the other. Shield generators that drew power from the planet's core. Weapon emplacements that could target our ships in orbit. The alien veteran's mechanical eye focused on the recording devices as he recalled. The horror of watching his fleet's bombardment simply disappear into the human defenses. Plasma bolts that could melt through starship armor were absorbed by shields. That had been built in mining caves using salvaged parts. We threw everything we had at that mountain for 2 weeks, Vextar continued. Enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The humans inside just kept working, kept building, kept improving their defenses. But what had truly disturbed the Zeltharian forces was discovering that human children were helping with the war effort. Not as soldiers, but as builders and engineers, whose small hands could work with components that adult humans found difficult to handle. A 10-year-old boy named Bobby Chun had been captured during a reconnaissance mission, and his interrogation had revealed the scope of human preparation. The child knew how to build plasma rifles, Vextar testified, his voice showing the confusion he still felt years later. He could explain the energy flow patterns in our weapons better than some of our own technicians. But when we searched his belongings, we found toy soldiers and drawing books. The humans had somehow managed to educate their young in advanced warfare techniques without destroying their innocence. Children who could assemble electromagnetic pulse devices still played games and told stories. They had become part of the war machine while remaining fundamentally human. Bobby Chun asked me if I had children of my own, Vextar recalled. When I told him yes, he showed me pictures he had drawn of Zeltharian families he had never seen. My species before the war, but somehow he understood that we were not so different from his own people. The psychological warfare that followed had been unlike anything in Zeltharian military experience. The humans had begun broadcasting music into their camps, performed by musicians like Maria Rodriguez, who played instruments made from battlefield debris. The melodies seemed designed specifically to affect Zeltharian neural pathways. The music made my soldiers homesick, Vextar explained. Rodriguez would play these haunting songs on instruments she had built from pieces of our destroyed vehicles. The sound carried emotions that our species recognized even though we had never heard anything like it before. Morale among the Zeltharian forces had begun to crumble as soldiers found themselves thinking about their families instead of their mission. The human music spoke of loss and hope and sacrifice in ways that transcended species barriers. Even Vextar found himself listening to the broadcasts when he should have been planning attacks. They weaponized beauty, the alien commander testified. They took the wreckage of war and turned it into something that reminded us why peace was worth fighting for. The Battle of Miller's Creek had demonstrated the full extent of human tactical evolution. Lieutenant Amy Foster had led what appeared to be a desperate charge against entrenched Zeltharian positions. Vextar's forces had prepared for another display of human recklessness, expecting to cut down the attacking soldiers with minimal casualties to themselves. Foster's charge was the most convincing deception I had ever witnessed, Vextar admitted. 20 humans running directly at our fortified positions with nothing but small arms and explosive charges. Every tactical analysis said they were committing suicide. The Zeltharian defenders had focused all their attention on the charging humans, cutting them down with concentrated fire. Foster had died within sight of their positions, her final act throwing a grenade that barely scratched the Zeltharian fortifications. It had seemed like a pointless sacrifice. While we were watching Foster and her soldiers die, 300 more humans emerged from tunnels behind our lines, Vextar continued. They had been digging for weeks, moving through the underground like some kind of burrowing animals. The deception had been so complete that Vextar lost half his battalion before his forces could reposition to meet the real threat, the humans. Had sacrificed 20 lives to save hundreds more, but they had done it in a way that made their enemies focus on the sacrifice instead of the strategy. Foster knew she was going to die, Vextar testified. Her final transmission was a song, the same battle hymn we had heard on New Dakota. She sang while she charged, sang while she died, and somehow that song coordinated the real attack. The alien veteran paused, his cybernetic eye flickering as he accessed particularly painful memories. The humans had not just outfought his forces that day. They had demonstrated a level of coordination and sacrifice that challenged every assumption about primitive species and inferior tactics. After Miller's Creek, I began to understand that we were not fighting a war, Vextar concluded. We were participating in something else entirely, something that the humans understood better than we did. The chamber remained quiet as the alien commander finished his second day of testimony. Tomorrow he would describe the moment when the conflict crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, when both sides discovered just how far they were willing to go for victory. The third day of Commander Vextar's testimony began with visible reluctance from the alien veteran. His purple scales had taken on a darker hue, and his cybernetic eye seemed to struggle with focus as he approached memories that clearly caused him pain. The tribunal members leaned forward, sensing that they were about to hear the most difficult part of his account. Everything changed when both sides crossed lines that should never be crossed. Vextar began, his voice barely above a whisper. The humans had begun using biological warfare against my people. They released engineered viruses that specifically targeted Zeltharian respiratory systems. The alien commander described waking up one morning to find half his troops struggling to breathe. The human scientists had somehow analyzed Zeltharian biology and created diseases that attacked their immune systems. Soldiers who had survived plasma fire and explosive charges were dying slowly in their sleep from invisible weapons they could not fight. Dr. Rachel Green led their biological research team, Vextar testified, a human female who had been studying alien diseases before the war began. She turned her knowledge of healing into the most terrifying weapons we had ever faced. The Zeltharian High Command had responded with authorization for planet crackers, weapons designed to shatter entire worlds. Vextar remembered the moment he received those orders, the weight of knowing that his species was about to commit genocide on a scale that would horrify future generations. My commanders told me that if humans wanted to play with extinction, we would show them what true extinction looked like, Vextar continued. The planet crackers were weapons we had never used in actual warfare. They were meant to be deterrents, threats that would make enemies surrender without fighting. But the humans had not surrendered. Instead, they had begun evacuating their civilian populations with an efficiency that amazed even their enemies. Vextar watched through his ship's sensors as entire cities emptied in orderly processions that looked more like parades than desperate escapes. Families like the Browns and the Garcias walked to evacuation ships while their world burned around them, the alien veteran testified. Children carried handmade toys, adults held photograph albums and family heirlooms. They sang their national songs while they evacuated. The sight had been unlike anything Vextar had witnessed in 4 decades of military service. He had expected panic, screaming, desperate crowds fighting for space on the evacuation vessels. Instead, he saw humans helping each other with the same calm efficiency they had shown in battle. A woman named Helen Baker carried 3 wounded soldiers on her back for 12 kilometers, Vextar recalled. She weighed perhaps 60 kilograms, and each soldier was larger than her. But she never stopped moving, never complained, never asked for help. The human evacuation had been so well organized that they managed to save 90% of their civilian population before the first planet cracker struck. But what disturbed Vextar most was not their efficiency, but their attitude toward their enemies even in the face of total destruction. They continued treating our wounded even during the evacuation, the alien commander testified. Human medics, like Dr. Kevin Walsh, worked on Zeltharian prisoners while their own world was being destroyed. Walsh had become a symbol of something Vextar could not understand. The human doctor had learned that his own son died in a Zeltharian orbital bombardment, yet he continued saving the lives of enemy soldiers. Vextar had watched Walsh work with tears streaming down his face, his hands steady and sure as he operated on wounded Zeltharians. He saved the life of my second-in-command while grieving for his own child, Vexstar said, his mechanical eye flickering with processing strain. I could not understand how he contained such grief and rage while still showing mercy to his enemies. The contradiction had begun to eat away at Vexstar's certainty about the righteousness of his cause. How could his species be fighting the correct war if their enemies showed more honor than his own forces? The question had kept him awake during sleep cycles, haunting his thoughts during battle planning sessions. I began to question everything. I had been taught about warfare and honor, Vexstar admitted to the silent tribunal. The humans were supposed to be primitive and savage, but they showed more civilization than my own people. The breaking point had come when Vexstar made contact with human resistance fighters operating behind Zaltharian lines. A spy named Carol Thompson had approached him in the ruins of a bombed cathedral, both of them risking execution by their own species for even speaking to each other. Thompson showed me intelligence reports that proved my commanders were lying about human capabilities, Vexstar testified. The humans had been holding back their true weapons, trying to minimize casualties. On both sides, the revelation had shattered everything Vexstar thought he knew about the conflict. Thompson had provided evidence that humans possessed weapons capable of destroying entire star systems, but had chosen not to use them. They were fighting a limited war against an enemy that was trying to exterminate them. She gave me detailed plans of human weapon systems that could turn stars into bombs, Vexstar continued. Technology that could collapse solar systems into artificial black holes. They had the power to erase my species from existence, but they were trying to find a peaceful solution. The alien commander described his growing horror as he realized that every Zaltharian victory had been allowed to happen. The humans could have ended the war at any time, but they kept fighting with restraint that seemed almost suicidal. They were dying to preserve the possibility of peace. Thompson asked me to help end the war before both our species destroyed themselves, Vexstar testified. She said that humans wanted to find a way to live together with other species, not conquer or destroy them. Against every military regulation he had ever sworn to uphold, Vexstar had begun secretly feeding intelligence to human resistance fighters. He provided tactical information that helped them avoid the worst of Zaltharian attacks, saving thousands of lives on both sides. I became a traitor to my own species because I could no longer believe that we were fighting for the right reasons. The alien veteran admitted. The humans had shown me what true honor looked like, and my people had forgotten it completely. The partnership between Vexstar and Thompson had lasted for months, both of them working to minimize casualties while their superiors planned ever greater acts of destruction. They met in secret locations, sharing intelligence and trying to find ways to end the killing. Carol Thompson taught me that enemies could become allies if they shared common goals, Vexstar concluded. She risked her life every day to save soldiers from both our species, and she made me understand that peace was worth any personal sacrifice. The chamber remained silent as Vexstar finished describing his transformation from loyal soldier to secret ally of humanity. Tomorrow he would reveal the most disturbing truth of all, the discovery that would change his understanding of the war completely. The fourth day of testimony found Commander Vexstar struggling with memories that seemed to cause physical pain. His cybernetic eye had developed a pronounced flicker, and the purple scales around his neck had turned almost black with stress. The tribunal waited patiently as the alien veteran prepared to reveal what he had called the most disturbing discovery of the entire war. 3 months after I began working with Carol Thompson, we discovered something that changed everything. Vexstar began, his voice carrying a tremor that had not been present in previous sessions. Human prisoners had been conducting unauthorized experiments on themselves in Zaltharian detention facilities. The alien commander described how routine medical examinations of human captives had revealed biological modifications that should have been impossible. The prisoners had somehow been altering their own genetic structure using crude equipment, smuggled into the detention centers. Dr. Alex Turner led their research efforts, Vexstar testified, a human scientist who had been captured during the siege of Fort Henderson. We thought we were holding a broken old man who posed no threat to anyone. But Turner had been far from broken. Using medical supplies meant for treating injuries, he had been conducting experiments that would have impressed the most advanced research facilities in the galaxy. The human scientist had successfully integrated Zeltharian neural interfaces with human brain tissue. Turner had turned himself into something new, Vextar continued, his mechanical eye struggling to maintain focus. Part human, part machine, completely adapted to use our technology better than we could ourselves. The implications had been staggering. If humans could biologically adapt to alien technology within months instead of generations, they represented an evolutionary threat unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Turner's research suggested that human children born after the war would be naturally compatible with any alien technology they encountered. The old man showed me brain scans of human volunteers who had undergone his procedures, Vextar testified. They could interface directly with our computer systems, control our weapons with thought alone, and access our databases without any external equipment. But the truly terrifying discovery had come when Turner revealed that his research was not unique. Human scientists on dozens of worlds had been conducting similar experiments, all coordinated through a communications network that Zeltharian intelligence had never detected. They had been preparing for this war long before we arrived, Vextar admitted. Every human colony had research teams working on biological adaptation to alien technology. They knew we were coming. The alien commander described his horror at learning that the humans had been studying Zeltharian society and military doctrine for years before first contact. They had intercepted communications, analyzed battle records, and prepared countermeasures for weapons and tactics that the Zeltharians considered their greatest secrets. Turner gave me access to human intelligence files that contained detailed analyses of our entire military structure. Vextar continued. They knew the names of our commanders, the capabilities of our ships, and the locations of our secret bases. The revelation had led to an even more disturbing discovery. Carol Thompson had arranged a secret meeting with human military leaders Tony Garcia and Linda White, who revealed that their species had been deliberately limiting their response to Zeltharian aggression. Garcia and White showed me weapons testing, footage that made our planet crackers look like children's toys. Vextar testified, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They had developed ways to turn stars into weapons, to create artificial black holes that could swallow entire solar systems. The humans had possessed the capability to end the war within days of its beginning, but had chosen instead to fight a limited conflict that preserved the possibility of peaceful coexistence. Every Zeltharian victory had been carefully allowed to happen as part of a larger strategy that prioritized long-term survival over short-term dominance. They showed me plans for weapons that could erase my species from existence, Vextar continued. Biological agents that would target Zeltharian DNA specifically, leaving other species completely unharmed. They could have committed genocide against us without affecting any other life in the galaxy. The human military leaders had explained that their species had learned from studying the histories of other civilizations. Conquest led to rebellion, domination created eternal enemies, but cooperation could create lasting peace. They were fighting to establish the foundation for future coexistence. Linda White told me that humans had no interest in ruling over other species, Vextar testified. They wanted to join the galactic community as equals, not conquerors. The war was teaching them about their neighbors so they could learn to live together. But the most shocking revelation had come when Garcia revealed that humans had infiltrated Zeltharian command structures months before the war began. Officers that Vextar had served with for years were actually human agents using advanced disguise technology. My communications officer, Sergeant Kexton, was a human named David Chun, Vextar admitted, his cybernetic eye flickering rapidly. The soldier whose life Dr. Walsh had saved was actually a human spy who had been feeding intelligence to his own people for the entire war. The scope of human infiltration had been breathtaking. Nearly a third of the Zeltharian officer corps were actually human agents who had undergone surgical and genetic modification to appear as members of other species. They had access to every battle plan, every tactical decision, every strategic objective. They could have destroyed our entire fleet at any time, Vexstar continued. Human agents controlled our communications, our navigation systems, and our weapons targeting. The war could have ended with the complete annihilation of Zaltharian forces, but they chose restraint. The alien commander described his growing understanding that humanity's true weapon was not their technology or their tactical skill, but their ability to think beyond the immediate conflict toward long-term consequences. They were fighting a war designed to create peace. Garcia explained that every battle was planned to minimize casualties while demonstrating human capabilities. Vexstar testified. They wanted to show us that resistance was futile without making surrender feel like humiliation. The human strategy had been to prove that they could win without destroying their enemies, creating the foundation for future cooperation. They understood that today's enemies could become tomorrow's allies if both sides survived the transition. They made me understand that the war was never about conquest, Vexstar concluded. It was about establishing the rules for how different species could coexist in the same galaxy. When Vexstar had reported these discoveries to his own high command, his warnings had been dismissed as enemy propaganda. Zaltharian leaders refused to believe that primitive humans could have deceived their advanced civilization so completely. My superiors called me a traitor and a fool, the alien veteran testified. They accused me of being brainwashed by human psychological warfare. They could not accept that we had been outmaneuvered by a species they considered inferior. The refusal to acknowledge human capabilities had led to the final, catastrophic phase of the conflict. Zaltharian forces had launched a desperate assault designed to break human resistance once and for all, not knowing that they were walking into a trap that had been prepared for months. The final battle was not a battle at all, Vexstar concluded. It was a demonstration of what humans could do when they stopped holding back. The final day of Commander Vexstar's testimony began with the alien veteran appearing more composed than he had been in days. His cybernetic eye had stopped flickering, and his purple scales had returned to their normal color. But there was something different in his expression, a weight that spoke of revelations yet to come. The war ended not with our victory or defeat, but with something I had never experienced before, Vexstar began, his voice carrying a strange mixture of confusion and wonder. The humans showed us their capacity for forgiveness. After the Zaltharian surrender, Vexstar had expected execution or imprisonment for his war crimes. Instead, he found himself assigned to joint reconstruction efforts alongside the same humans he had spent months trying to kill. The experience had challenged every assumption he held about warfare and its aftermath. Engineer Sam Davis, the same human who had turned Fort Henderson into an impregnable fortress, became my reconstruction partner, Vexstar testified. He treated me not as a former enemy, but as a colleague working toward the same goal. The alien commander described the surreal experience of working with humans to rebuild the worlds that both sides had destroyed. Davis had shown him construction techniques that combined human ingenuity with Zaltharian technology, creating structures that were stronger than either species could build alone. Davis never mentioned the friends he had lost to my plasma cannons, Vexstar continued. He focused only on the work we needed to do together. When I asked him about forgiveness, he told me that holding grudges was a luxury his species could not afford. But the most difficult assignment had come when Vexstar was asked to work with Dr. Michelle Lee, a human physician who had been treating war casualties from both species. Lee had lost her entire family in a Zaltharian orbital bombardment, yet she welcomed Vexstar as a partner in establishing medical facilities for refugees. Dr. Lee taught me surgical techniques that could save lives I had helped to endanger, the alien veteran testified. She showed me how to treat wounds caused by weapons I had fired. Every day working with her was a lesson in mercy that I did not deserve. The humans had somehow made Vexstar complicit in their healing process, whether he wanted to participate or not. They gave him responsibilities that required him to care for the victims of his own actions. forcing him to confront the individual cost of every decision he had made during the war. They made me help rebuild what I had helped destroy, Vexstar explained to the silent tribunal. Every structure we raised together was a reminder of the destruction both our species had caused. The most haunting memory came when Vexstar was personally invited to attend the funeral of Colonel Jake Morrison, the human commander who had first shown him that his species had underestimated their enemies. Morrison had died from injuries sustained in the war's final battle, but his death had come during the Reconstruction period. Morrison's daughter Kate personally asked me to speak at her father's funeral, Vexstar testified, his voice breaking slightly. She wanted me to tell hundreds of human mourners about her father's courage and honor. Standing before the assembled crowd of humans whose families Vexstar had helped kill, the alien veteran had been forced to speak about the man who had taught him what true military leadership looked like. The experience had been more terrifying than any battle he had ever fought. I spoke to people whose children had died because of orders I had given, Vexstar continued. They listened with respect, even gratitude. Some of them thanked me for honoring their colonel's memory. The alien commander described his growing understanding that humans processed grief and loss differently than other species. Instead of seeking revenge or holding eternal grudges, they seemed to transform their pain into something constructive that could benefit future generations. Kate Morrison told me that her father would have wanted his death to mean something positive. Vexstar testified. She said that humans learned from their enemies because that was the only way to prevent future wars. But the final revelation had come during Vexstar's ongoing work as a liaison between species. Assigned to the human vessel New Horizons, he discovered that his former enemies had been studying him as carefully as he had been studying them. The humans knew that other species would judge them based on how they treated former enemies, Vexstar explained. My testimony here today is part of their strategy to establish peaceful relationships with the rest of the galaxy. The alien veteran had realized that even his presence at the tribunal was carefully orchestrated. Humans understood that other species would be more likely to trust the word of a former enemy than the claims of the victors themselves. They made me their witness and their advocate, Vexstar continued. Every word I speak here serves their larger goal of joining the galactic community as trusted partners rather than feared conquerors. The humans had not just won a war, they had fundamentally changed the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be civilized. Their treatment of defeated enemies had established new standards for post-conflict behavior that other species would struggle to match. They showed me that victory without mercy is just another form of defeat, Vexstar testified. A conquered enemy will always seek revenge, but a forgiven enemy can become the strongest ally. The alien commander described his current life aboard the New Horizons, where he worked alongside humans and other species to establish diplomatic protocols for future first contact situations. His experiences during the war had made him uniquely qualified to help prevent similar conflicts. The humans gave me a purpose that honored both the dead and the living, Vexstar explained. They turned my guilt into something useful, my shame into motivation for peace. But the most disturbing aspect of human forgiveness was how complete it appeared to be. They did not seem to be pretending to forgive while secretly planning revenge. Their mercy was genuine, which made it more terrifying than any weapon they possessed. I have access to their military databases, their strategic planning, their most sensitive intelligence, Vexstar testified. They trust me with information that could be used against them. This is not the behavior of a species that holds grudges. The alien veteran concluded his testimony with a warning that he knew the tribunal might not fully understand. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their tactical skill, but their ability to transform enemies into allies through genuine forgiveness and shared purpose. Any species that underestimates human capacity for mercy does so at their own peril, Vexstar stated firmly. They will find themselves not conquered but converted, not defeated but transformed into something they never expected to become. As Commander Vexstar stepped down from the witness stand for the final time, the chamber remained silent. His testimony had painted a picture of humanity that challenged every assumption about primitive species and inferior civilizations. The haunting accounts he had shared would be studied for generations, analyzed by strategists and philosophers alike. The humans did not just win a war, Vextar concluded. They changed the fundamental nature of what war means in our galaxy. They made peace more powerful than conquest, forgiveness more effective than revenge. Walking back to his quarters aboard the New Horizons, Vextar carried with him the weight of understanding that would shape the rest of his life. He had witnessed the birth of a new kind of civilization, one that measured victory not by the destruction of enemies but by their transformation into friends.